she, entered a marriage with a disabled millionaire. Then the ceremony unmasked everything. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain rolled down the windows of the downtown Boston cafe, turning the city lights into trembling streaks of gold. Inside, the aroma of roasted beans mixed with the low hum of evening conversations. Emily Hart sat near the back, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee she could barely afford. Her eyes were tired, shadowed by weeks of sleeplessness, overdue bills, and the weight of her mother's hospital expenses. She did not know her life was about to pivot in a direction she never imagined. Across the room, the door opened with a soft chime. A man in a tailored charcoal suit entered, leaning on a sleek black cane. His movements were precise, practiced, almost too disciplined to reveal how much pain he might be hiding. His name was Alexander Reid, the reclusive millionaire whose family owned one of the largest private tech companies in the country. To the world, he was the brilliant mind who survived a violent car accident that left him partially disabled. To Emily, he was a stranger who had requested a meeting without explaining why. Alexander approached the table with quiet authority. "Miss Hart?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Emily rose instinctively, unsure of the etiquette, unsure of everything. "Yes, that is me. Is everything all right?" Alexander sat down, folding his hands on the table as if preparing for a negotiation rather than a conversation. His eyes studied her closely, but not unkindly. "I will not take much of your time," he said. "I have an offer, one that may solve the immediate crisis you are facing." Her breath caught. "Crisis? I do not understand." "You have been served an eviction notice," he continued calmly. "Your mother's treatment is behind on payments, and you are juggling 2 part-time jobs that are still not enough. You are cornered, Miss Hart. I know that because my team looks into everything before I approach someone." Emily felt the room shrink around her, shame, anger, and confusion tangled in her chest. "What exactly are you offering me?" Alexander reached into his briefcase and slid a pristine white envelope across the table. "A marriage," he said. "Between you and me." Emily blinked, certain she misheard him. "I am sorry. A marriage?" "Yes," he answered with absolute confidence. "A legal marriage. A contract. A partnership in appearance only." The cafe noise faded into a hollow echo. Emily stared at the envelope as if it might burn her fingers. "Why me?" she whispered. Alexander did not flinch. "Because I need a spouse to stabilize my public image and secure my position during an upcoming corporate transition. My accident has made the board restless. They believe my condition makes me vulnerable. A marriage will shut them down." He paused before adding, "And I chose you because you are discreet, sincere, and not tied to anyone who would exploit my name." Her pulse hammered. "And what would I receive?" "Financial security," he said plainly. "Your debts cleared. Your mother's care paid in full, a monthly allowance, a year of stability." Emily swallowed hard. It sounded unreal, too sharp, too neat, too cold. "And what exactly do you expect from me?" "You will attend certain events with me," Alexander said. "You will play the role of my wife. Nothing intimate, nothing emotional. This is a contract, not a romance." A part of her wanted to get up and walk out. Another part, the desperate part, the part picturing her mother on a hospital bed, could not ignore the lifeline placed in front of her. She forced her voice to steady. "And if I say no?" Alexander leaned back slightly. "Then you walk out that door and continue drowning alone. I am offering you a way out, Miss Hart. Not charity, an exchange." The rain outside intensified, tapping against the glass like a countdown. Emily looked at the envelope again. Inside it waited a pen, a contract, and a future she never asked for but might be forced to accept. She drew a long breath, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "This is insane," she said quietly. Alexander's expression did not change. Sometimes survival requires accepting the unthinkable. His words hung between them, heavy and inescapable. And slowly, Emily realized her life had just reached a crossroads, one she could not ignore, no matter how terrifying it felt. This was only the beginning. The next morning arrived with a gray Boston sky pressing low over the city, matching the weight in Emily Hart's chest. She had barely slept. The envelope Alexander Reid left on her small kitchen table felt like a living thing, staring back at her with every step she took. She had opened it once at dawn, scanning the clean legal language, the list of obligations, the detailed financial guarantees, and the strict confidentiality clause. She closed it immediately, her hands shaking. By 7:30, she stood in her tiny apartment, looking around at the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, and the stack of overdue bills that covered the counter like a second skin. Her mother's latest medical invoice sat on top, the number circled in red. Emily ran her thumb along the edge of it, remembering the nurse's voice from the night before. "We really need an updated payment, Miss Hart." Her breath wavered. She knew she had run out of time. At 9:45, she walked into the marble lobby of Reid Industries. The difference between her world and his struck her immediately. Polished floors, clean lines, people moving with purpose, wearing tailored suits and expensive shoes. She kept her chin up, smoothing the wrinkles from her modest blouse, even though it would never match the environment around her. The receptionist looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Emily Hart. Mr. Reid is expecting me," the receptionist typed, then her tone softened slightly in recognition. "Top floor, executive office. Good luck, Miss Hart." Emily stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and the hum of movement lifted her toward a life she was not sure she was ready for. Her reflection in the polished steel walls looked fragile, like a person walking into something far larger than she could comprehend. She clenched her hands to stop them from shaking. When the elevator doors opened, a woman in a navy skirt and blazer waited. "This way, Miss Hart. Mr. Reid is ready for you." Emily followed her down a silent hallway lined with abstract art and large windows revealing the Boston skyline. The entire floor smelled faintly of citrus and fresh paper. The assistant opened a tall glass door. "Go right in." Alexander Reid sat behind a minimalist black desk, reviewing documents stacked neatly before him. He did not rise when she entered, but his eyes lifted with calm precision. "You are early, Miss Hart," he said. Emily swallowed. "I wanted to think clearly." His gaze flicked to the contract folder she held. "And have you reached a decision?" She stepped forward slowly, each movement measured. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I will do it." Alexander nodded once, as if he had anticipated this. "Then let us proceed." He opened the folder on his desk and slid 2 copies of the contract toward her. The black ink on the crisp pages looked impossibly final. Emily sat across from him, the leather chair swallowing her small frame. She picked up the pen that lay between them. Her name shook slightly as she wrote it, but she finished every line. When she handed the papers back, Alexander reviewed them, then signed with clean, deliberate strokes. The sound of the pen gliding across the paper echoed in the otherwise quiet room. When he finished, he capped the pen and closed the folder. "Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Hart," he said. Emily let out a slow breath she had been holding since dawn. "So, what happens now?" "The ceremony is this evening," Alexander replied. "It will be private, efficient. My attorney will finalize the legal filing. You will be provided with attire and transportation." Emily nodded, trying to absorb the sudden acceleration of her life. "Tonight," she repeated softly. Alexander rose, leaning on his cane, his expression unreadable. "Understand this, Miss Hart. Our marriage is contractual. There will be expectations. There will be scrutiny. But I chose you because I believe you can withstand it." Emily stood as well, her hands clasped together. "I will do my best." He studied her for a moment, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I will see you tonight." Emily walked out of the office with the contract still echoing in her mind. As the elevator descended, she pressed a hand to her chest. Her heartbeat felt too loud for the enclosed space. The decision was made, the path was set, and in a matter of hours, she would enter a marriage that was not built on love, but necessity. She just prayed she would not lose herself along the way. The afternoon moved faster than Emily Hart could comprehend. By 4 o'clock, a black sedan arrived in front of her apartment exactly as Alexander Reid had promised. The driver stepped out, addressed her by name, and handed her a garment bag with careful precision. Inside was the most elegant dress she had ever touched. Soft ivory fabric, smooth beneath her fingertips, with a simple silhouette that carried quiet sophistication. It was not extravagant, but it was unmistakably expensive. Emily changed carefully, her hands trembling as she zipped the back. She added minimal makeup, brushed her hair until it shone, and stared at the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. At 6:30, the car rolled through the northern suburbs, winding past iron gates toward a courthouse tucked between tall oak trees. The sky had fallen into a deep blue, flickering with scattered city lights. Emily stepped out of the car on unsteady legs, her heart racing with every breath. The air was cool, and the silence felt heavy. Moments later, another car arrived. Alexander stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit that matched the cane he leaned on. His posture was calm, controlled, and undeniably imposing. His eyes traveled over her dress, and although his expression remained neutral, there was a brief pause that suggested approval. "Good evening, Miss Hart," he said. Emily nodded. "Good evening." They walked inside together. The courthouse corridors echoed with each slow step they took, his cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Emily felt the weight of the moment sinking deeper into her chest. She forced herself to breathe steadily, but her pulse refused to calm. Inside the small ceremonial room, an officiant waited with a folder of legal documents. A witness from Alexander's legal team stood nearby. There were no flowers, no guests, no music, nothing resembling a celebration. Only signatures, paperwork, and a contract binding two strangers together. The officiant cleared his throat. "We are gathered today for the legal marriage of Alexander Reid and Emily Hart. This will be brief." Emily's stomach twisted. The vows were simple, reduced to legal requirements. "Do you, Alexander Reid, willingly enter this marriage as defined in the documentation provided?" "I do," Alexander replied without hesitation. "And do you, Emily Hart, willingly enter this marriage as defined in the documentation provided?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do." The officiant signed the certificate, then passed it to Alexander's attorney. "Congratulations. The marriage is now legally binding." Emily felt the world tilt slightly. She had expected to feel relief, fear, or maybe guilt. Instead, she felt nothing but numbness. Alexander extended his hand. "From this moment forward," he said, "you are Mrs. Reid. I expect punctuality, discretion, and respect. In return, I will uphold every term we agreed upon." Emily placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, practiced. "Understood," she said. Outside, the night air hit her face like a wave. The chauffeur opened the car door, and they stepped inside together. As the vehicle pulled away from the courthouse, the city lights reflected against the windows, casting shifting patterns across the leather seats. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap, the wedding band feeling strangely heavy on her finger. She did not dare look at Alexander, and he did not speak either. The silence between them was not hostile, but structured, like everything he did. After 20 minutes of quiet driving, the car turned through towering iron gates. The Reid estate rose ahead of them, illuminated by warm exterior lights. Marble columns, stone pathways, and a sprawling garden surrounded the entrance. It was breathtaking, but it did not feel like home. It felt like stepping into a different planet. Alexander exited first and gestured for her to follow. "Welcome to the estate," he said. The foyer was massive, with polished wooden floors and a grand staircase that curved like a sculpture. A housekeeper greeted them with a slight bow and guided Emily toward the guest suite prepared for her. "This will be your room," Alexander said. "Mine is down the hall. We will maintain separate quarters unless appearances require otherwise." "Of course," she replied softly. He paused, regarding her with a measured expression. "Dinner is at 7 when necessary for public image. Otherwise, you are free to occupy your time." Emily nodded again. "Good night, Mrs. Reid," he said finally. "Good night." When he disappeared down the hall, the silence closed in around her. Emily stepped into the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the ring once more. She was married, but only on paper, and she had no idea what the coming days would bring. The next morning arrived with a pale wash of sunlight slipping through the sheer curtains of Emily Hart's guest suite. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The quiet was too clean, too spacious, too intentional to belong to her old apartment. Then the memories flooded back: the courthouse, the vows, the ring, the car ride through the iron gates. She sat up slowly, her heartbeat steady but heavy. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Mrs. Reid?" a woman called gently. "Breakfast is ready in the dining room." The title still felt foreign. Emily thanked her quietly and changed into a simple blouse and slacks before making her way downstairs. The dining room was larger than her entire apartment, with tall windows that cast warm light across a polished table set for two. Alexander Reid was already seated at the head, his posture immaculate, a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. His cane rested against the arm of the chair. He looked up when she entered. "Good morning, Mrs. Reid." "Good morning," she replied as she sat several seats down from him. He lifted an eyebrow slightly. "You may sit closer. The distance is unnecessary unless guests are present." Emily hesitated, then moved to the seat adjacent to him. A housekeeper appeared with plates of eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. The smell alone reminded her that she had barely eaten yesterday. Alexander studied her quietly before speaking. "You will receive a schedule today," he said. "There are 2 events this week that require your presence. One is a charity dinner, and one is a board reception. Both will expect us to present as a united front." Emily nodded, taking a sip of water to keep her voice steady. "I will be prepared. You will receive guidance," he continued. "Attire, media etiquette, and the expectations for each appearance. You are not expected to navigate this alone." The statement surprised her slightly. It was not kindness exactly, but it was something like structure, something steady enough to hold on to. After breakfast, Alexander's assistant guided her through the estate's long hallways, pointing out key areas: the study, the sitting room, the staff wing, and the guest suites. Finally, she led Emily to a large dressing room filled with neatly arranged garments. "These have been selected for upcoming public events," the assistant said. "Mr. Reid requested pieces that would suit your style and remain appropriate for the corporate image." Emily brushed her fingers along one of the dresses. Everything was tasteful, understated, elegant. Nothing looked like it belonged to her old life. The assistant handed her a tablet. "This contains your schedule and the guidelines for the week. If you need anything, you may message me directly." When the door closed, Emily exhaled slowly. She sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the sheer size of the world she had stepped into. It was not just wealth. It was order. It was scrutiny. It was pressure disguised as perfection. A soft vibration from the tablet startled her. A message appeared. From Alexander Reid. "We will leave at 6 for the charity dinner. Please be ready by 5:30. A." Reid. Emily stared at the message for a long moment. There was nothing personal in the words, but there was something unmistakably precise about them. The entire day had been structured for her, shaped for her, without her permission but not without purpose. She spent the afternoon preparing herself. She practiced holding her shoulders back, practiced calm breathing, practiced walking in heels that were slightly higher than she preferred. She watched short tutorial clips on how to pose for photos so she would not embarrass either of them. By 5:30, she stepped out of her room wearing the navy dress chosen for the dinner. It hugged her frame without flaunting it, elegant in a quiet way. Her hair was pinned neatly, and her makeup was light but polished. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, Alexander was waiting. He stood beside the open door, leaning slightly on his cane. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes paused on her for just a second longer than expected. "You look appropriate," he said. It was the closest thing to a compliment she had heard from him. "Thank you," she replied softly. The driver opened the car door, and they stepped inside. The evening sky had dimmed into indigo, the city lights flickering like distant fireflies. Emily folded her hands in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. As the car pulled away from the estate, she realized that tonight would be her first true test. She would have to stand beside a powerful, enigmatic man and pretend to be his wife in front of the people who judged him the most. The thought made her pulse quicken. She was no longer just Emily Hart. She was Mrs. Reid, and she had no idea how the world would see her next. The ride into downtown Boston was quiet, broken only by the low murmur of the car engine and the occasional click of Alexander Reid's cane as he adjusted his position. Emily Hart kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the blur of headlights passing by. She had rehearsed her lines, her posture, her smile, but nothing prepared her for the knot tightening in her chest as the car approached the charity venue. When they arrived, bright lights washed over the pavement, and a line of black cars stretched down the block. Photographers waited behind barricades, their cameras poised like watchful eyes. Emily felt her heartbeat become uneven. Alexander turned to her calmly. "When we step out, stay close to me. Smile politely. Do not answer any questions unless I indicate it is appropriate." She nodded. Understood. The driver opened the door, and a rush of cool evening air greeted them. Alexander stepped out first, leaning on his cane with practiced strength. Emily followed, placing her hand lightly on his arm because she had been instructed to do so for the cameras. Flashbulbs immediately burst to life, a rapid staccato of light that made her blink. There they are, Alexander Reid, and his wife. The word wife sent a strange ripple through her stomach. She kept her posture steady and followed Alexander up the steps toward the glass entrance. Inside, the room opened into a warm glow of chandeliers, polished floors, and guests dressed in tailored designer clothing. Conversations hummed softly over the sound of a live jazz trio. A few heads turned as they entered. "Amazing," someone whispered. Alexander actually brought his spouse. Emily felt her face warm. She glanced at Alexander, but his expression remained composed and unreadable. He led her toward a group of executives near the center of the room. She recognized some of them from news articles. They were powerful, wealthy, and intimidating in a way she had never encountered up close. "Alexander," one of the men said with a polished smile, "it is good to see you. And this must be your wife." Emily smiled politely. "It is nice to meet you." The man's eyes flickered with curiosity, taking in her appearance with a subtle intensity. It was not unkind, but it was evaluative, as though he was assessing her like a component in a business arrangement. Another woman approached, dressed in a gold gown that shimmered under the lights. She looked Emily up and down with a faint smirk. "So this is the woman who finally convinced our elusive Alexander to settle down. Congratulations." Her tone was smooth but edged with something sharp. Emily kept her voice steady. "Thank you. It is an honor to be here." The woman raised a brow, perhaps expecting a more elaborate response. Emily remained quiet, choosing grace over uncertainty. Alexander, however, stepped slightly forward. "Emily has a strong sense of composure," he said. "That is something I value." Emily blinked, surprised by his unexpected defense. The woman's smirk faded just a little before she excused herself. For the next hour, Emily accompanied Alexander through conversations with investors, board members, and charity organizers. She listened carefully, spoke only when appropriate, and maintained the poise she had practiced all afternoon. More than once, she caught people glancing at her with curiosity, confusion, or calculated interest. She knew she was being judged, measured, and quietly discussed. During a brief lull, Alexander leaned toward her slightly. "You are handling this better than expected." The compliment was subtle, but it warmed her more than she anticipated. "I am trying," she said quietly. "Effort matters," he replied. Just as she began to steady her nerves, a voice cut through the crowd. "Alexander, I see you finally brought a date." Emily turned, and her breath caught. A woman approached, tall, striking, dressed in crimson. Her expression carried familiarity, and something else Emily could not place. Alexander's posture stiffened an inch. "Victoria," he said. So this was the ex-girlfriend Emily had only heard mentioned in passing by the assistant earlier that day. The woman's eyes flicked to Emily, and a slow, knowing smile crossed her face. "And this must be the new Mrs. Reid." Emily extended her hand politely. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Victoria ignored the gesture. "Alexander never mentioned you before, but then again, things happen quickly when money is involved." Heat rose to Emily's cheeks, but she held her ground. "Some things are not defined by timelines," she said calmly. What matters is commitment. Victoria's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing for a second before she stepped back. Alexander spoke with measured precision. Emily is my wife, Victoria. I expect you to treat her with respect. There was a quiet authority in his voice that made the air shift. For the first time that evening, Emily saw something protective in him, something that felt almost real. Victoria lifted her chin. Of course, Alexander. Enjoy your evening. She walked away without another glance. Emily exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. Alexander turned to her. You did well. Her pulse eased. I just said what felt right. He nodded. Sometimes instinct is more valuable than strategy. As they moved through the rest of the evening, Emily felt a subtle shift, an unfamiliar thread of connection pulling taut between them. She had come here as part of a contract, but somehow the world around them had begun to treat her as something more. The ride back to the estate was quieter than the drive to the charity event, but the silence felt different now, not cold, not uncomfortable, simply full of everything that had happened. Emily Hart replayed the conversations, the flashes of cameras, the moment Victoria tried to humiliate her, and the way Alexander Reid had stepped in with a calm, unwavering defense. She had walked into that event as a contractual spouse, yet for brief moments she had felt like he truly saw her. When they reached the mansion, the house staff had already dimmed the lights for the night. Emily stepped out of the car, her heels clicking softly against the stone path. Alexander moved more slowly, leaning on his cane. She walked beside him without thinking. Inside, he handed his coat to a housekeeper and turned toward her. You handled yourself well tonight, he said. Better than many people born into these rooms. Emily felt a subtle warmth rise inside her. Thank you. I tried to remember everything your assistant told me. He shook his head slightly. That was not training. That was composure. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their eyes held just a second longer than expected before Emily looked away. She followed him toward the grand staircase, her dress whispering against the polished floor. At the first landing, he paused and glanced toward her room. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow will be more demanding. Emily nodded. Good night, Mr. Reid. He hesitated. It was brief, but noticeable. Good night, Emily. She returned to her room, closed the door gently, and leaned against it with a long, steadying breath. The evening had drained her, but something inside her pulsed with new energy, something like pride, something like possibility. She changed into comfortable clothes, washed off the makeup, and let her hair fall loose. But sleep did not come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cameras, the cold stares, Victoria's smirk, and Alexander's subtle but unmistakable steps in front of her, shielding her from every sharp edge. Near midnight, she gave up, trying to sleep. She slipped out of her room and walked quietly toward the large window overlooking the garden. The moon glowed faintly through the tall glass panes, casting silver light across the marble floor. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered, "What am I doing here?" Behind her, a soft tap echoed. She turned to see Alexander approaching slowly, his cane touching the ground with each deliberate step. He was dressed in a simple black shirt, no tie, no suit jacket, his posture slightly more relaxed than usual. I noticed the hall light, he said. Is everything all right? Emily hesitated. I could not sleep. He moved beside her, looking out the same window. Neither could I. They stood in silence for a moment. The garden lights flickered softly outside, illuminating swaying branches and trimmed hedges. Emily finally spoke. Do events like this always feel so intense? Intensity is the price of visibility, he said. People do not attend to support charity. They attend to watch each other, to evaluate, to calculate, to remain relevant. And where do I fit into that? She asked quietly. He turned his head toward her. You fit where I decide you fit. Tonight you stood beside me. That matters in ways you do not yet see. Emily absorbed his words carefully. Why does it matter so much to you? Alexander looked back at the garden. When he answered, his voice was lower, almost reflective. I am attempting to secure stability within my company. The accident changed the way the board sees me. They believe my disability is a weakness. A spouse gives the appearance of normalcy and strengthens public perception. Emily listened closely. So this marriage was never about companionship. It was about necessity, he said plainly. But necessity does not eliminate respect. She looked at him, unsure how to respond. He continued. And tonight, he said, you earned more respect than I expected. A quiet warmth spread through her chest. She whispered, I just did what felt right. That instinct, he said, makes you far more valuable than you realize. The words lingered between them, honest and unpolished. Emily felt a strange shift inside her, as though something subtle had clicked into place. Alexander finally straightened, leaning on his cane. We should try to rest. Tomorrow we prepare for the board reception. It will be more difficult than tonight. Emily nodded. I understand. He paused as if he wanted to say something more, then simply said, Good night, Emily. Good night, Alexander. She watched him walk down the hall until the shadows swallowed his silhouette. When she returned to her room, her heart felt strangely different, heavier, but in a way she could not name. For the first time since their contract began, she felt the boundary between them tremble. Just slightly, just enough to matter. The following morning arrived with a chill that seeped through the mansion's tall windows. Emily Hart woke before sunrise, her mind still tangled in fragments of last night's conversation at the window. She dressed quietly and made her way downstairs, expecting another structured morning of schedules and instructions. But when she entered the dining room, she immediately sensed something was different. Alexander Reid was already seated, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. A tablet lay on the table beside his untouched breakfast. His expression was sharper than she had ever seen. Good morning, Emily said softly. He did not answer right away. Instead, he tapped the tablet, turning it toward her. Look, Emily stepped closer. On the screen was a headline from a popular business gossip site. The Mystery MRS. Reid. Who is she? And why now? Below the headline was a photo from the charity event. Alexander standing tall, Emily holding his arm, flashbulbs exploding around them. Her heart dropped. Alexander's voice was cold, controlled. This went live an hour ago. And it is spreading. Emily read further. Sources say the whirlwind marriage raises questions. Some speculate the sudden union is a strategic cover for weakening corporate control following Reid's accident. Another paragraph added, Emily Hart, from a modest background, appears drastically mismatched with the Reid empire. Insiders believe the marriage may not be built on romance, but convenience. Emily felt her stomach twist painfully. I did everything correctly. I followed the guidelines. I stayed close to you. I said very little. This is not about what you did, Alexander said. This is about perception. Once the public forms an opinion, it is difficult to reverse. Emily's voice trembled. So what happens now? Now, he said, we control the narrative. Before she could respond, his assistant entered the room, carrying a folder. Mr. Reid, there has been a leak. Alexander stiffened. What leak? The assistant placed the folder on the table. Inside were printed screenshots, copies of the contract they had signed. Emily felt the world tilt under her. No, she whispered. That cannot be real. Who would? The board, Alexander said flatly. Or someone connected to them. This is exactly the angle they would use to destabilize my leadership. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. Her chest tightened painfully. Our contract? People know. The assistant nodded. Not fully. But pages are circulating. Enough to raise suspicion. Alexander closed his eyes for a brief second, the muscles in his jaw flexing. This is the crisis they were waiting for. Emily felt heat rise behind her eyes. She had agreed to the marriage to help her mother, to survive. She had followed every rule he gave her. Now her name was being dragged into a storm she never asked to enter. Alexander, she whispered, I am so sorry. He opened his eyes, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw frustration, real frustration, mixed with something deeper. This is not your fault, he said. It is mine. I underestimated how far they would go, but the reassurance did not calm her. Her pulse pounded as guilt and fear swarmed her thoughts. I do not belong in your world, she said softly. They are tearing you apart because of me. Alexander stepped toward her, leaning on his cane but maintaining his steady presence. You are not the problem, Emily. Before he could say more, his phone buzzed violently. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "It is the board's attorney," he said. "They want an emergency meeting." Emily took a shaky breath. "And they will blame me." "They will try," he replied. She stared down at the printed pages scattered across the table. Her signature stared back at her, exposed to strangers, twisted into ammunition. "Alexander," she whispered, "maybe I should stay away from the meeting. Maybe I should not be seen with you today." He looked at her sharply. "No, that is exactly what they want. They want to weaken us, to divide us. Emily, you are my wife. Contract or not, that is the role you hold. And walking away will only prove their point." She blinked, stunned by the firmness in his voice. "But the contract leak was not your doing," he said. "It was theirs, and I will not let them weaponize you." Emily felt a tremor of emotion rise in her chest, unexpected and overwhelming. He was choosing to stand with her, even now. The assistant cleared her throat softly. "The car is ready, Mr. Reid. The meeting begins in 30 minutes. Alexander straightened his jacket, then offered his arm to Emily. "Are you ready?" he asked. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand gently on his arm. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." As they walked toward the door together, a cold realization settled in Emily's heart. This was no longer just a contract. This was a battle. And she was standing in the center of it with him. The drive to the Reid Industries tower was tense and silent. Emily Hart sat beside Alexander Reid, her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her handbag. She could see the strain in his posture, the subtle tension in his jaw every time he shifted his cane. The contract leak, the headlines, the board's sudden meeting, everything had collided at once. When the car stopped, reporters surged forward like a wave. Cameras flashed violently. Microphones pressed against the windows. The driver stepped out first, forcing a small path through the crowd. "Alexander, is it true the marriage is a contract?" "Mrs. Reid, are you being paid to stay with him? Is this a fraud for corporate gain?" Emily's breath caught, but Alexander placed his hand gently over hers. "Do not look down," he murmured. "Walk with me." He stepped out, leaning on his cane, and she followed, keeping her posture steady even as questions were hurled at them. Flashbulbs exploded, capturing every micro-expression. Emily held her head high. If she faltered, the narrative would collapse on top of them. Inside the lobby, security sealed the doors behind them. "Are you all right?" Alexander asked. She nodded, though her pulse was still racing. "Yes, I am fine." But he paused, studying her face carefully. "You handled that with more dignity than most people in this building," he said. A small, fragile warmth spread inside her chest. They entered the executive boardroom moments later. 12 members sat around a long table, their expressions sharp, calculating. At the head of the table sat Charles Harrington, the board's oldest and most domineering member. His gaze flicked between Alexander and Emily with blatant suspicion. "Alexander," Charles said, "thank you for finally joining us. We have quite a situation on our hands." Alexander leaned on his cane and took his seat. Emily sat beside him, aware of every eye on her. Charles tapped a stack of papers. "Your marriage contract has been leaked, pages of it. Quite interesting clauses, I must say." A whisper of judgment rippled through the room. Emily felt her stomach twist painfully. Alexander replied calmly, "That document is incomplete. What you have seen is edited." "Edited or not," Charles said sharply, "what it proves is that this marriage is not legitimate. It makes you appear unstable, vulnerable, and that raises questions about your capacity to remain in control of this company." Emily looked at Alexander, waiting for his response. Instead, he surprised everyone. "My capacity is not the issue," he said. "Your integrity is." Murmurs erupted around the table. Alexander continued, his voice becoming colder. "The timing of this leak, the selective pages, the media phrasing, it all points to an internal orchestrated effort to dismantle my leadership. Someone in this room wanted to use my wife to weaken me." Charles' face reddened, but Alexander pressed on. "You want answers? Then let us start with the truth." He turned to Emily gently. "Emily, tell them why you married me." She inhaled slowly, her hands trembling just enough to feel, but not enough to show. "I married Alexander because he offered me a way to save my mother," she said. but he never treated me as a burden. He treated me with respect. I am not here to play a role in your corporate games. I am here because I agreed to an arrangement that was honest between the two of us." The room fell quiet. Emily continued, her voice steadier. "And for your information, the only people who saw the contract were the legal teams. So if it leaked, it came from someone trying to hurt him, not me." Her words landed like a shockwave. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Alexander sat a little straighter. "Emily has done nothing wrong," he said. "But if any of you continue to weaponize her, I will personally take action. Against individuals, not the board as a whole." Charles tried to recover. "Alexander, this is enough." Alexander interrupted. "I will not step down. I will not be manipulated, and I will not allow my wife to be publicly humiliated for your political leverage." Silence. Heavy. Absolute. One of the younger board members cleared her throat. "We have reviewed your quarterly performance. Your leadership remains stable. The only instability comes from this internal sabotage. I support Mr. Reid." Another member nodded. "As do I." One by one, hands were raised. When the count finished, the majority sided with Alexander. Charles sat stiffly, defeated but trying to hide it. Alexander stood, leaning on his cane. "This meeting is over." Emily rose beside him. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept pace. As they exited the room and the doors closed behind them, Emily finally exhaled the breath she had been holding. She turned to Alexander. "I hope I did not overstep." He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, soft, open, almost vulnerable. "You saved me," he said quietly. "Tonight you saved everything." Her heart beat faster. "I just told the truth." "Sometimes," he said, "the truth is the only thing strong enough to protect someone." They walked toward the waiting elevator together, and for the first time since their marriage began, the distance between them felt smaller, unexpectedly small. Alexander reached out, gently taking her hand. "Emily," he said, "from this moment forward, our marriage does not need to remain a contract." Her breath caught. He looked into her eyes, steady and sincere. "If you will allow it," he said softly, "I would like it to become something real." Emily felt her chest tighten, her pulse quicken, and something inside her shift in a way she had never imagined. She squeezed his hand lightly. "Then let us decide together," she whispered. "Without contracts, without fear." Alexander nodded, the faintest smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. And as the elevator doors closed around them, the future ahead no longer felt like a transaction. It felt like a beginning. The elevator doors slid open onto the quiet top-floor hallway of the Reid Industries Tower, but neither Emily Hart nor Alexander Reid stepped out right away. They stood facing each other inside the warm glow of the elevator lights, the weight of the boardroom confrontation still settling between them. Emily's pulse was loud in her ears. Alexander's hand was still wrapped around hers, steady and deliberate. For the first time since the contract began, she was not afraid of the silence. It felt like a place where something honest could finally breathe. When they stepped into the hallway, the building felt calmer, almost serene compared to the chaos outside. Security had already cleared the main lobby of reporters. Emily walked beside Alexander, matching her steps to the slow, rhythmic tap of his cane. "Emily," he said quietly, "I meant every word I said in that room." She felt her breath catch. "I know." He stopped beside a large window overlooking the city. The skyline glowed under the fading afternoon sun, casting long, golden shadows over the streets below. Alexander turned to her fully. "For weeks, I tried to convince myself that this arrangement was only a strategy," he said. "A shield, a necessity." His voice softened. "But you have become something more than that." Emily looked down at their joined hands before lifting her eyes to meet his. "I never expected any of this," she said. "I never expected you to defend me the way you did today, or to look at me the way you are looking at me now." His expression shifted with something unguarded. "You showed every person in that room what character looks like." "No," she whispered. "I just told the truth." "That is exactly why it mattered," he replied. They held each other's gaze. The city lights flickered below them like scattered stars. Finally, Alexander released a slow breath. "If you want to walk away from all of this, I will not stop you." You owe me nothing beyond the contract, and after today, the contract has no meaning left. Her heart clenched. Do you want me to walk away? He stepped closer, his voice steady, almost vulnerable. No. I want you to stay. I want you to choose me, not because of obligation or pressure, but because you feel something real. Emily felt warmth bloom through her chest, gentle and powerful all at once. Then, I will be honest, she said softly. I do feel something. I just did not know if I was allowed to. Alexander raised his hand, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear with delicate care. You are allowed, he whispered. The elevator chimed again in the distance, but neither of them moved. Emily swallowed. If we move forward, there cannot be secrets between us anymore. No hidden motives, no half-truths. Agreed, he said. From now on, everything will be transparent. And no distance, she added quietly. He nodded. No distance. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the city below them. Then Alexander lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was not dramatic or hurried. It was intentional. It was sincere. Emily Hart, he said, I would like to rebuild this marriage from the ground up, not as a contract, but as something honest, something earned. Emotion welled behind her eyes. Then let us begin again. Alexander offered his arm. She laced her hand through it, not because she was expected to, but because she wanted to. They walked out of the building together just as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting warm orange light across the street. Reporters waited outside the barricades, cameras ready, but for the first time, Emily did not shrink away. She stood beside Alexander, her posture tall and steady. One reporter shouted, Mr. Reid, is your marriage real or not? Alexander glanced at Emily, giving her the choice. She squeezed his arm gently, then stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. Our marriage began as a contract, she said. But today, we chose each other, and that is as real as it gets. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd, followed by a burst of camera flashes. Alexander looked at her with unmistakable pride. Emily met his gaze, and a quiet realization washed through her. She was no longer a woman fighting to survive. She was a woman standing beside someone who had finally chosen her not out of strategy, but out of truth. As they stepped into the car, Alexander intertwined his fingers with hers. Emily, he said softly, whatever comes next, we face it together. She nodded, her heart full. Together, the car pulled away, leaving behind the chaos, the doubts, and the shadows of their contract. Ahead of them stretched a future neither of them had planned, but both of them were ready to build. And for the first time, their story was not about survival, it was about love.